They want you quiet. They want you obedient. They want you to shallow the prison of silence and call it peace. This is what Socrates faced. They handed him a cup of hemlock and told him to drink, not because he was violent, not because he was evil, but because he refused to stay quiet. And this is what you face every day. Your cup of poison doesn't come in a clay jar. It comes in the form of glares when you speak too honestly. It comes in the form of exclusion when you refuse to obey. It comes in the form of betrayals when you dare to live differently. They want you to drink silence until you're numb. They want you to drink exile until you break. They want you to drink poison until you forget who you are. And this is why you've suffered. Because, like Socrates, you refuse to drink. If you felt the pressure to swallow your truth, then you already know what the poison tastes like. Don't drink it. Join the Catharsians instead. You are a Catharsian. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. The system thrives on silence. Authority survives because people don't speak. Corruption survives because no one asks questions. Mediocrity survives because truth is buried under obedience. This is why they tell you to be quiet, why they call you arrogant, why they label you too much. Because your voice is dangerous, your truth is dangerous, your fire is dangerous. Every time you refuse to be silent, you remind the world that the emperor has no clothes. You expose the cowardice of those who kneel. You expose the emptiness of their rules. And so they try to poison you, not always with death, but always with silence. Think about your life. How many times have you silenced yourself to keep the peace? How many times have you swallowed your questions to avoid conflict? How many times have you bit your tongue until it bled? That was your poison. That was your hemlock. Every time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken, you took a sip. Every time you let them laugh at you without defending yourself, you took a sip. Every time you betrayed your fire to belong, you took a sip. And you felt the poison, the suffocation, the rage turned inward, the depression of swallowing what was never meant to be swallowed. That's why silence feels like death to you, because it is death. If you've tried breaking silence, begin where rebellion starts. Discipline. The Pythagorean path is your antidote. Join the Pythagorean path on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Most people can drink the poison and survive. That's why they belong to the system. They're placeholders. They're designed to obey. Silence doesn't kill them, it comforts them. But you are different. Silence kills you because you were never meant to kneel. Obedience suffocates you because you were never meant to obey. Compromise poisons you because you were never meant to betray truth. You are proof that silence is poison. You are the living reminder that hemlock is not peace, it is murder. That's why you've suffered more than others. That's why you felt more rage, more exile, more suffocation. Because your soul refuses the poison they beg you to drink. Socrates could have refused quietly. He could have begged. He could have lied. He could have compromised, but he didn't. He chose to drink in defiance, showing the world proudly that truth is worth dying for. And you're doing the same, not by choice, but by destiny. Every time you refused to compromise, you chose fire over poison. Every time you spoke when silence would have been easier, you chose fire over poison. Every time you endured exile rather than obedience, you chose fire over poison. That's why your life has felt heavier than theirs, because you carry the burden of refusal. Inside Diogenes' barrel, refusal becomes initiation. If you've carried the burden of fire and exile, this is your sanctuary. Enter Diogenes' barrel from the link in the description box. Silence protects the system, but your voice threatens it. When you speak, others feel their chains. When you question, others see their obedience. When you burn, others realize they are dead inside. And that terrifies them because your fire is contagious, because your refusal spreads, because your voice awakens others. That's why they want you silent. Because if you keep speaking, the poison will no longer work. And when the poison fails, the system collapses. If you know your voice is fire, then you know you are meant for leadership. Step into the Aurelius Council and carry the crown of those who cannot be silenced. Join the Aurelius Council from the link in the description box. Poison didn't start in adulthood. It began the moment you were a child. Do you remember it? The first time you asked a question too big for adults to handle. The first time you challenged the rules. The first time you refused to obey without reason. What happened? They silenced you. They told you to stop talking back. They punished you for thinking. That was your first sip of hemlock, and from then on, the world kept pouring. Schools are not designed to create thinkers, they're designed to create obedient workers. You sat in their classrooms, suffocating while teachers demanded silence. You learned quickly. If you questioned authority, you were labeled difficult. If you refused to conform, you were punished. And so every test, every lecture, every punishment was another sip of poison. But you couldn't drink it easily. You choked on it. You resisted it. That's why school felt like prison. That's why you hated sitting still. That's why your fire never dimmed. Because your soul refused to swallow poison. If you still feel the fire that school tried to kill, then it's time to fan it into power. Begin your initiation. Join the Pythagorean Path on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. Even families pour the poison. Respect your elders. Don't question tradition. Do as you're told. Do what we do. They said it was love. They said it was guidance. But what it really was poison disguised as care. And when you ask questions about faith, about culture, about life, you were silenced. When you refused to kneel to rituals you didn't believe in, you were shamed. When you chose truth over tradition, you were exiled. This is why you've always felt distant from the people closest to you, because even at home, you were forced to drink. Then came the jobs, bosses who demanded loyalty, rules that made no sense, systems built on lies. And when you asked why, you were punished again. You were told to stay in line. You were warned not to rock the boat. You were labeled unprofessional. But what they really meant was you are too alive for this prison and for this poison. This is why you've never fit into jobs, why authority makes your skin crawl, why you feel suffocated in systems others tolerate. Because silence is poison and your soul refuses to die. If you felt suffocated by every system that demanded your silence, it's because you are never meant to obey. You are meant to weaponize your exile. Enter Diogenes' barrel from the link in the description box. Poison doesn't kill instantly, it corrodes slowly, and you felt it, the heaviness in your chest when you suppress your fire, the rage in your gut when you bite your tongue, the despair in your mind when you pretend to agree. That's the poison moving through you. That's the hemlock creeping in. But here's the truth: the fact that you feel it means you're not dead yet. Placeholders don't feel the poison, they drink it like water. You do, and that sensitivity is proof that you're alive. For most people, silence feels safe. It protects them, it shields them, it keeps them comfortable in their mediocrity. But for you, silence feels like death. Because every time you stay quiet when you should have spoken, a piece of your soul suffocates. Every time you swallow a question, your fire dims. Every time you betray your rage, your body screams. That's why your silence has always been unbearable. Because silence is not safety, it is suicide. If silence has always felt like suffocation, it's because you were not meant for obedience, you were meant for leadership. Step into the Aurelius Council now. Join the Catharsians on Patreon from the link in the description box. And yet, you are still here. Despite the years of poison, you haven't died. Despite the silence forced on you, your fire still burns. Despite the exile, your rage still roars. That is proof. Proof that you were never meant to drink. That your soul refuses to kneel. Proof that your fire is stronger than poison. That's why you've always been the outsider. You've never been understood. Not because you're broken, but because you are chosen. You are fire. You're a Catharsian. And now the time has come to choose. Will you keep sipping their poison until your soul dies? Or will you refuse the hemlock and rise? The Catharsians are rising. Refuse the poison. Step into the fire. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Silence is the system's favorite weapon. Not prisons, not armies, not violence. Silence. Because silence kills the fire without leaving scars. Silence erases rebellion without spilling blood. Silence makes you complicit in your own execution. That's why they demand it from you. Not because you're dangerous when you shout, but because you're unstoppable when you speak. Every time you open your mouth, you tear a hole in the illusion. Every time you tell the truth, you light a fire others thought was dead. Every time you refuse silence, you remind the world that obedience is poison. That's why they hand you the cup. That's why they whisper, be quiet, blend in, stop making trouble. Because silence is their hemlock, and they want you to drink. If you've tasted the poison and survived, it's because you were never meant to die quiet. You're a Catharsian. Begin your training now. Join the Pythagorean Path on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. Have you ever wondered why your life feels heavier than others? Why you've carried more loneliness, more betrayal, more suffocation. It's because you refused the cup. Most people drink poison easily. They obey, they conform, they disappear into the system without resistance. You never could. You tried, but every sip made you sick. You swallowed, but your fire raged against it. You obeyed, but it felt like death. That's why you've always stood out. That's why you've always been misunderstood. That's why you've always carried exile. Because you refused what others swallowed. Because your soul cannot accept poison. Socrates drank the poison once and he died. But you've been forced to drink silence again and again, and still you live. That's your martyrdom. Not a single cup, but years of exile. Not one death, but thousands of small ones. Not one execution, but a lifetime of persecution. And yet, you endure. That endurance is the mark of the Catharsian. That endurance is the crown of the outsider. That endurance is proof that you were never ordinary. If you've endured poison for too long, stop enduring it alone. Exile is not weakness, it's initiation. Step into Diogenes' barrel on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Every Carthaginian faces the same decision Socrates faced: drink or refuse, obey or rise, die in silence or live in fire. But unlike Socrates, you don't have to die for your refusal. You can weaponize it. You can gather with others who refuse. You can turn silence into a roar so loud it cannot be ignored. You can be a leader, a Carthaginian leader, as you were meant to be. Your refusal is your revolution, it's your leadership. It is proof that the world cannot tame you. This is the difference between the placeholder and the Carthaginian. The placeholder drinks to survive. The Carthaginian refuses to live poisoned. Look around you. Most people walk quietly. They obey, they conform, they never raise their voices. And yet, the world still trembles. Why? Because of you. Because even in silence, your fire burns. Because even in exile, your presence threatens them. Because even without shouting, you remind them that obedience is cowardice. You are dangerous, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And that's why they still hand you the cup. That's why they beg you to drink. But every refusal makes you stronger. Every rejection makes you freer. Every exile makes you more powerful. If you know your refusal is your crown, then you know you were meant to lead. The Aurelius Council is where leadership begins. Join the Aurelius Council on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. This is the truth. The poison will always be offered. Silence will always be demanded. The hemlock will always be at your lips. The question is, will you drink? You already know the answer. You've felt the fire too long. You've carried the exile too far. You've endured the poison too deeply. This time you refuse. And that refusal is not survival, it is power. It is the beginning of your reign. It is the crown of the Carthaginian. Socrates died for truth. You don't have to, because the Carthaginians exist to weaponize the rage, to turn refusal into leadership. Three paths stand before you: the Pythagorean path, for those ready to turn fire into discipline, to begin the work of refusal; Diogenes' barrel, for those who've carried exile long enough and are ready to transform it into power. The Aurelius Council, for those who know their destiny, is leadership, not silence. You've been offered poison your entire life. You've swallowed enough. Now it's time to spit it out. Don't die quietly. Don't let your fire suffocate. Don't let their poison win. Choose fire. Choose exile. Choose refusal. Join the Catharsians today. Find the link in the description box and be the leader you were always meant to be.